thank you for coming, Kei. I'm glad I could catch you whenever you come to Japan. You don't have much time, I know that, so I appreciate that you took the time. Now, obviously, we've worked together in the past, and we've done a number of things, like things of which I'm pretty proud, like the interview we did in Iwama with Isoyama Sensei, a number of things, Takasaki, which was very intense and very rewarding. Now, of course, today's interview is a little bit different because now, as people know, I'm not involved officially with the IF anymore, even though I still help out for technical things. And I think the way I want to articulate the interview today is on you as a person, as an Aikido guy, if that's okay.
I will be happy to answer the majority of the questions in an open and free way.
Okay.
That's fine.
So to begin, you look Japanese, but you speak much better English than most Japanese, and you speak Spanish. So, how did that come about? Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, my parents were Japanese diplomats, and I spent my childhood in South America. I was born in the island of Kyushu, in the city of Fukuoka, and from the age of 4 we moved to Cuba and then to Bolivia, and I think in my formative years I was exposed to a culture that was not very typical Japanese. So I started to speak Spanish better than Japanese, and gradually I forgot Japanese. And in those days there were no Japanese schools for Japanese kids overseas. So I went to a local school and I immersed. I became more South American than Japanese. I returned to Japan at the age of 11. And suddenly I was put into a regime of study, and I had to catch up because I didn't know all the Japanese classics, history. I didn't know kanji to begin with. So after tremendous hard work, and I reintegrated into the Japanese society, and I went to Keio University, which is one of the best ones, I would say, in Japan. But for me, between 11 to 18, 19, it was sort of very negative feeling, because I was suddenly brought back into a cage and I had to behave differently. But my background is much more open, and that is proving to be very useful for many things that I have done professionally, academically, and so forth.
So when you returned to Japan, where were you located?
The majority of the time, when we came back, was always in Tokyo. So my father retired in Tokyo. We lived in Suginami, not too far from Hombu, and by accident I started to do Aikido, and I'll be happy to talk more about that.
So you began Aikido at Hombu?
Yes, I started Aikido in 1969, May 7th. So I'm celebrating over 50 years of Aikido. I never expected that I would continue to do Aikido this long. I went to Hombu Dojo with the kind introduction of an individual who was my father's friend, who used to be a pilot in the Japanese self-defense force. And he felt that as a Japanese man, I should learn one or two martial arts. And I wasn't very interested until I went to Hombu. The mood at Hombu at that time was, as you can imagine, relatively gloomy because it was so soon after O-sensei passed away. But I saw Aikido and removed all the preconceived notions that I had about martial arts, and I thought, oh, this is phenomenally beautiful, and I think I can do this.
So it's interesting because you really came at Hombu, as you said, in a really transitional time. Of course, Kishomaru Doshu was in charge. He had been in charge for more than 10 years before that. But of course, with the passing of O-sensei, probably a new dynamic came into place.
Yes. In those days, in 1969, 1970, Tohei Koichi sensei was still there. He was the Shihan Bucho. And his class was super popular. I attended many of his classes. I liked him as an Aikidoka. He had such a charismatic presence. But of course, my main focus was the 6:30 class for Doshu. I attended Osawa Sensei's Thursday second class, Sasaki Sensei's, Masando Sensei's second class on Saturdays. And well, of course, I tried with all the senseis that were so charismatic in those days. So the exposure, the variety of techniques that I could see at that time was very rewarding for me.
You talked about Tohei Sensei, and of course, of all the Shihan, he had the most experience abroad, of course. Did you find that you could connect with him more easily than with other teachers because of that somehow international experience?
Yes, I think Tohei Sensei had the sense of humor. Tohei Sensei was very expressive in the way that he taught classes. And I think many people felt that he was a phenomenal instructor as well as leader for Aikido. I think well, unfortunately, if he had stayed in Aikido, he would have added another additional element to that. But I think he tried to challenge the lineage, which I think is not acceptable in Japan. And it's too bad for Aikido, but I think we cannot help it. Shikata ga nai, as you may say.
Well, since you mentioned the lineage, it's unclear to me whether Aikido has always been meant to be an Iemoto system or not. What was the consensus at the time when O-sensei passed away?
Well, I was too beginner to be involved in such matters, and I know that later I was informed by my teacher that I started studying when I moved to the U.S. to do my graduate studies, Mitsunari Kanai sensei. He said that Tohei sensei had invited many of the Shihans and high-ranking people to follow him. And Tohei sensei was under the expectation that many people would follow him. And even though many people liked Tohei sensei, I think the lineage thing was more important for many of the Japanese instructors. So even though they liked Tohei sensei, suddenly they didn't go. That is my understanding.
And to follow up, you were probably already in the US when Kishomaru Doshu passed away. How did the transition to the current Doshu happen? Do you remember?
Well, the transition, of course, was somewhat expected as the lineage thing was established much further along the lines for the Ueshiba family. And it is obvious, although it's not written anywhere, that that's the way that it's going to be, has become like de facto direction that Aikikai will continue to take.
Right.
So after Kishomaru Doshu passed away, I think everybody, whether it's in Aikikai, there was a very smooth transition. Not that I'm aware of people trying to split like
what happened before
other people have done before.
Because it's of course it's an interesting question in the context of course the IF and your role in the IF. I'm not quite sure about what the expectations of the Hojin legal statuses are. Because the Aikikai is a Hojin and it's what you say in English, non-profit organization. Is it supposedly a democratic entity or is it quite free? In other words, how does it fit with that expected Iemoto system of martial arts?
I think they follow. I was since 1995 till 2005, more or less. I was Hyogin of Aikikai, and I attended a few meetings, and it follows a legitimate Hojin or structure. The decisions are made according to the official meetings, the Rijikai and so forth. Of course, Japanese corporations or public entities and many others, the decision-making process is never the same as Western companies that have more individualistic positions, and in Japan is I remember that many years ago they would say that board meetings in Japan are represented by 3 S's: sleeping, smiling, and silent. And it's not something that refers to Aikikai per se, but the Japanese arrange the consensus beforehand. So that's why they're smiling. They're sleeping because
everybody knows
there's not much to talk, and they're silent because they all agree. They have agreed to that. I'm not saying that that is the direction, but Doshu has some very competent counselors supporting him to get some ideas about how to run the operations and so forth. So in that sense, you have to say that he is structured as a proper public interest legal entity.
Does the government have much oversight in what's going on in those sort of entities, or?
I think right now I'm not fully familiar with that internally, but the government has created a sports agency led by Mr. Daichi Suzuki, a gold medalist in swimming, and within the structure of sports cho and also the Japanese sport authorities, Aikido is properly is part already of the official establishment. So unlike some other different Aikido groups that separated from Aikikai, you have to say that Aikikai is already part of the Japanese established sports community.
Mm-hmm. So now within the Aikikai itself, as we know, it's a very vertical organization, certainly as far as the teaching allocations go, the rankings and so on. So I guess that brings us to the IAF, which is, and so whether that's a perception or whether that's what it is, I don't know, but which seems to me like more of a democratic entity, which it holds elections. There's a chairman, the general secretary, there are members, board members. So I can't help but feel that by their sheer design, those organizations might perhaps find difficult to deal with each other because they're really structured very differently. So I guess my question is, one, is the structure responsible for some difficulties? And the second question, part of the question would be, what is the purpose of the IAF being structured as it is? What does it add to the table that the Aikikai can't necessarily do?
Well, IAF was established more than 40 years ago, and I think second Doshu Kishomaru Doshu at the given time felt the necessity to form a global organization. I think there were some issues in Europe that some countries were trying to form their own one, and Aikikai took a preemptive action, and many of the initial members of the board were basically high-ranking Japanese shihans, heavily involved in the IAF. Nowadays we have the IAF Senior Council, and with Tada Shihan at the supreme top, we sometimes ask him for opinions. We periodically send them updates on the activities that we do, but we have much more freedom in what we can do. Of course, we don't want to create some position that goes against the interest of Aikikai. So the coordination with Aikikai is something that I personally take it very seriously. And one of the things that I requested after I became a chairman was to request that not only we meet once every 4 years, or we meet casually, because I come to Japan relatively frequently. I said we need to have a coordination meeting with the whole of Aikikai. So we are hosting meetings once a year to really meet together. And within the IF too, we do about once a month meeting via Google Hangout, and we share all the information via Google Drive, so every member knows what's happening. We send updates of our activities to all the member federations as well as senior council. In addition to our daily communication with Aikikai, we make an effort to communicate more to avoid misunderstanding and some unwanted confrontation situation.